What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Dr. Chris Burton, host of Battis Chaplain and principal consultant for DeBattis Consulting. How's everything going today, Chris?
No, I'm doing wonderful, brother. How's everything on your side?
Doing well, man. No complaints. So today's topic, and the reason I asked Dr. Chris on, is because I want to talk about Deion Sanders and the disruption that he's doing to the NCAA, to college football, all that stuff. So we want to start maybe with some history on Deion, the background on Deion Sanders, of course, being one of the greatest athletes in American history, being a two-sport athlete. How much about Deion do you remember growing up? I think we're about the same age. I want to say mid-30s or so.
That's right. Yeah,
so,
mid-30s.
So how much of Deion do you remember, and what was your first impressions of him as a kid?
So my first impression of Deion was him winning the Super Bowl with the Niners in '94 and absolutely hating the 49ers as a Cowboys fan at the time. And then immediately the next season loving Deion Sanders when he won the Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys in '95. And obviously we played a lot of playground football, so you had kids hitting the dance, that whole primetime shuffle. I mean, Deion was just an athlete, and you cheered for him, you wanted to be him all the way through. I remember being excited for his comeback with the Ravens when I think he was 37 years old.
Yeah, he wore 37 because he was 37.
He was past his prime, and still was out there, and it's just amazing to see. Pretty much the consensus pick on the greatest cornerback ever, be able to turn that into, truth prep, and then turning that into, his time with the NFL Network, which was just so fun. I think that clip with him and LaDainian Tomlinson and Shannon Sharp still goes viral, where they're just talking and just having a great time on there. And then being able to follow him all the way through Jackson State and now at Colorado. I can't cheer against Deion, man. I just love him too much.
He has this just incredibly legendary career. He's done things that no one else has ever done, and at the same time he just has this infectious charisma and positivity that he brings to everything. And I mean, some people might call it arrogance,
right.
Especially when he was real young. And I remember one of the stories that I recall was when he was preparing for the draft. There was a team, I think it was the Giants.
Giants, yeah.
Yeah, they're picking 10th or something like that, and they asked him to come work out or send him a plate, something like that. And he's like, nah, I'm not even going to bother. He's like, I'm going to be gone by then, so I'm not even going to bother. And I think this is he knew his worth. We'll say that. I think that's definitely a common theme that we've seen with Deion throughout his career. And something that when I was talking to Dave Zirin about Jim Brown, that he talked about as well, was that Jim Brown always knew his worth.
Yeah,
and I think these guys are very similar in terms of their bravado, their two-sport excellence, all that stuff. So let's talk about the coaching, because I think we all know about the work he's did in the NFL with the MLB, all that stuff. So do you recall why he decided to coach at Jackson State, which is, of course, an HBCU, maybe a lower-level football program? So what do you know about what went into the decision to coach there?
Well, I know I want to start with what he said, and also sort of the context of it too. So the thing I've admired about Deion is that he wears his faith on his sleeve, right? So he's talked about it in terms of I'm on a mission from God. That's why I went to Jackson State. So I can understand why it might have left a sour taste in folks' mouth when he left Jackson State. But thinking about the doors that were shut and the ways in which, it's pretty clear, if you've been following from the beginning, that his heart was set on being a coach at his alma mater, Florida State. And that door was not open for him whatsoever, right? And even at this point, with all the success that University of Colorado's having, and Florida State's having a great season too, I'd be hard-pressed to think that if that vacancy ever came up, that he would really turn it away. I think that's really where his heart is, to be able to go back to his alma mater and sort of complete the story in that way. So it was really a matter of the credibility. He wasn't taken seriously. People looked at him as you described earlier, arrogant, which I don't think is truly fair, because it doesn't seem to me as if it's all about him. I think a truly arrogant person is only in this for their own benefit. He seems, as far as I can tell, I don't know him personally, obviously, but he seems to be pretty earnest in wanting to uplift the kids on his team and wanting to transform their lives, not just as players, but as people. So it seemed as if he just couldn't get into the club, right? So being able to go to Jackson State, which to me is not a step down, right? It's clearly like FCS versus FBS, but it's also a sense of a really different context where he'd still be able to fulfill that mission about dealing with folks in terms of the whole person. And so those doors in the FBS were close to him, and that's what really opened up that opportunity for him to go to Jackson State and frankly have a tremendous amount of success in a very short period of time there.
He did. Yeah, one of the biggest things he did, of course, was getting Travis Hunter, who's the superstar two-way player,
right?
Who at the time was the consensus #1 recruit, and he turned down schools like Florida State, Alabama, etc.
Right.
Like any big program, you name him, and Deion was able to bring him to Jackson State. So, what is it about him that allows him to? I mean, we could talk about Colorado and the pull that he has there, but how does he get these kids, these stars, to come to Jackson State? Which again, it's not a step. I mean, we can be real. It's a FCS program, so it's a lower level program. It's Division II or 1AA as they used to call it. So, what is it about him that allows him to bring these kids to a program like that?
I think it's at least threefold. There's a lot of players of Deion's caliber who make terrible coaches, right? Because they can't imagine why it would be difficult for you to do that thing, right? This is something that, whatever the skill is, right? If he's talking to a cornerback, it was like breathing for him, right? To be able to do the things that he was able to do. And so for a lot of great players, elite players, legendary players, they get frustrated when they see people either not being as committed or just frankly not able to achieve it. But Deion has this deep charisma that allows you to believe in yourself, right? So there's that sense of he's a legend. So he's not just like talking about it. He's actually lived it. He's everything that you'd want your career to be like. But then he also has this sense of, I'm going to get the absolute best out of you. You're going to waste your time if you're not here to bring your absolute best. And three, I can't help but be stuck by the conversation that his team just put out with him and Travis Hunter, where Travis Hunter, has a lacerated liver, is going to be out for a few more weeks, but wants to play this weekend against USC. And Deion shared the message with his team of shutting it down and saying, you matter too much to me for me to allow you to play. And he even went so far to say to him, and this is Deion Sanders, once again, most likely the greatest cornerback we've ever seen, one of the greatest football players we've ever seen, saying to Travis Hunter, your potential is higher than mine. So imagine this person who's just, everything Travis Hunter would want to be saying, you're going to be better than me. Like he calls him son, and there's all of that language baked into it, which is not uncommon for coaches, but he's really living this out in a comprehensive way. It's not just, oh, you're just a player. He really has this whole cultural shift that he brings to a team of like, we're a family, not just in a sort of a corporate way, but he seems to be walking it out.
Yeah, I mean, of all the criticisms of Deion, I mean, you can't say that he's dishonest. He's always upfront with his guys. I'm sure he was real with Travis about the challenges that they were going to face at Jackson State and the facilities versus what they're used to and all that stuff. But I mean, he drew the attention. They played on ESPN a bunch of times, so he brought eyes to the HBCU level. And there's been some criticism there. I mean, what do you make of the criticism of folks at the HBCU level who are saying that Deion only used this as a springboard to greater success? What do you think about that?
I mean, I can understand the pain and the feeling of, just being used and sort of, someone, it's almost like you're at a party and someone sort of like just dance with you, but also looking around the room and say, who else is available to dance with? I can understand that sort of feeling coming up, but it was transformative. ESPN Game Day was not going to come to Jackson State without Deion being there. That's just an honest thing, and that's true for any program on that FCS level. That wasn't going to happen, right? So we have to just be realistic, as you were saying earlier, about sort of the expectations and the sort of the realities of Division 1AA. But also, I think there is a sense of HBCU culture is a world unto itself when compared with the culture like PWIs, right? So it's a very different understanding of like, what greatness is, right? It may not mean something to someone who, follows like Big Ten football, like what Grambling, say someone like the giant like Eddie Robinson would mean, right? That may not mean much to them, but it means the whole world to folks who were within the HBCU universe, right? So just thinking about what it means to sort of like cross over into like the power conferences, who could blame anyone for feeling the sense of like we've been slighted or we're just being used? But I think it would be misguided to act as if the accomplishments and the contributions of Deion's tenure at Jackson State, as limited as it was, he just got there in 21 and he's already at a different place. Undoubtedly, it was a short time, but it was an impactful time, and I think that to sort of understate that would be a disservice too.
Yeah, and I think if anything, he made it more attractive to be an HBCU head coach. I know Eddie George, who was a legend with the Oilers and the Titans, is coaching there now. I want to say Ed Reed was going to coach.
He was going to coach at Bethune-Cookman, but absolutely did not work out.
yeah. For a long list of other reasons we don't need to get into, but
100%.
I think he made it a viable destination, maybe for former players or guys who are looking for a chance to coach, a college football program, and may run into barriers or obstacles at the elite, level with the Big Ten and Big 12, all these different conferences. So I understand why they may feel a little slighted, like, oh, you just use this as a springboard, you don't really care anymore. But the attention and the money and all that he brought to the HBCU conference, which I think is the Southern Conference, I believe it's called.
SWAC, yep.
The SWAC, yeah. So I get it, but I think it's unfair to hold Deion to those standards. So the jump from Jackson State to Colorado, why Colorado? What was it about the program that made them think, maybe we should take a chance on this guy versus some of the, I don't think they really use the word blue blood in college football, but some of the more traditional powers.
For sure. Well, I mean, why, number one, it's like you won one game last season. Why not take a chance?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, what do you have to lose? I mean, I've been kind of joking, thinking about going into this. Like, he's already tripled the win record for last season. So, like, we think at 3-1 now. So I don't really think of it as something that was like a huge risk on Colorado's part, and not truly a risk on Deion's part either. In the sense that it's a program that he can truly say he's building up, right? Let's say it had been a situation where, hypothetically, if Nick Saban had retired and Deion went to Alabama, could you imagine going into a program that has such a storied history, is to use that sort of blue blood language of college football, the expectations would be unbearable. I have no doubt that Deion's someone who could live up to any amount of expectations and pressure, but at the same time, it's not the same situation as him walking into Colorado and really transforming the atmosphere in Boulder and transforming the expectations, for sure. I just was on an online store trying to buy some Colorado gear, and they were going to ship that hoodie in November. Right, so like I don't think that was the case last season. I think it would have been next day delivery last season. But thinking about if it was even available online,
yeah, so they would have paid you to come get some gear. They'd have paid me to come
get some Buffs gear, So it's a really transformative situation. It's a great, not even risk. It's just a great investment in each other. I think they're just, at this juncture, at least, perfect partners in terms of a program that desperately needs to be turned around in a time when the Pac-12 is very uncertain how many more teams are going to leave for other conferences. There's no real reason to say we shouldn't do this on either side, except for the fact, honestly, of Deion getting the heat that he did for leaving Jackson State in the first place. I don't see what sort of loss Colorado's taken in this.
Yeah, it's definitely a mutually beneficial relationship. I mean, I think so far it's only been a few weeks or 4 weeks through the season. By the time this is published, it'll be 5 weeks they'll have played USC.
That's right.
So it definitely is mutually beneficial. Like you said, they did win one game last year. It's a program that, despite winning a national championship at some point in its history, has become an afterthought since joining the Pac-12. They're one of the basement dwellers. They're just kind of there doing their thing. And he's I think it's already a success. We can talk a little bit more about what true success will be for Deion during his tenure here. But I think that the turnaround that he's already started is already a success in terms of the cultural cachet of the program. Like you said, you can't buy Buffs gear because it's back ordered, which I'm sure has probably never happened in the history of their program.
Ever.
So what were the steps? How did he turn this program around so quickly? I think we can talk a little bit more about the perfect storm that happened with NIL and the transfer portal and all that.
Right.
But how did he turn this team around so quickly? And the two-part question, what do you make of the criticism that he's received for the way he treated the former players?
Yeah, I watched that video when he walked into the locker room after that 1-win season and just told them straight up, some of y'all ain't gonna be here. Like I'm coming, and the luggage is Louis and all of that, right? So I think I would much rather that than the snake oil salesman approach of smiling in everyone's face, saying that we're all family, and then you find out you got cut. And then you find out you need to hit that transfer portal. I think the reality now, and it's true of anything in sports, right? Like, you know, if Steph Curry was playing in the 60s, it would be a very different style of play he would have, right? Just the 3-pointer didn't exist. So I think we always have to just judge things by the era. So Deion is in the time where the transfer portal exists. He is in the time where NIL deals are making 19-year-olds millionaires, right? They're just loaded. So I think all of that, he just understands how to use it to his advantage, right? So it's really something where you can't be too upset about him telling the kids to go, because now they had a chance to say, like, let me go and get a jump on this. I can look at what school would need me. If I'm an offensive lineman, I can look and see where can I go and flourish, rather than finding out so late that, you know, the options aren't even there for me. So I think he did right, as harsh as it may be, and as harsh as people may think the style of the message was. He did right by those kids in telling them, you're not going to be here next season. I'm bringing my folks in because I need to change the culture. Like, this isn't a Disney film where he can just, you know, this isn't Remember the Titans where he's just going to somehow take all these kids and magically make them into a bowl worthy team. That's not going to happen. You have to bring in the best and those who are capable of doing it. Obviously, even in the success, I agree with you, the success he's had so far, you're seeing that there's still a lot of work to be done. That line has to get better on both sides of the ball. He's still going to need to, like, bring in the caliber of players that he's going to need if this is going to lead to like a bowl game or a playoff appearance or anything of that nature, which we all kind of have that sort of romantic view of, like, this all ends with them winning everything. Maybe that won't happen, but it can't happen in year one, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we talked about it already, was the honesty of Deion Sanders. I did feel like it was a little bit harsh on the kids because, again, they are kids.
Right.
They, you know, even if they're getting paid, they're still, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old.
Right.
And, you know, but again, at the same time, you know, this is a harsh world. This is the football world. The sports world is especially harsh. They're going to find out real quick. And they found out real quick that, you know, they maybe weren't good enough for the vision that he had of this Colorado team.
Right.
So I do agree maybe his messaging could have been a little bit better, but the underlying idea of, I'm going to be real with you, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think of you, I'm not going to, again, like you said, be that snake oil salesman that's just trying to keep you around or sell you, you know, a false bill of goods or something like that. I'm going to tell you exactly what's on my mind, exactly what I think of you. And maybe he gave some of these kids a chance to impress him, maybe not. Maybe he made his decision coming in. But again, the results were on the field. They were 1-10 or whatever it is. So clearly they weren't good enough for his vision of the program. So far, Colorado is 3-1, maybe 3-2 after they play USC.
I think we can say 3-2.
Yeah.
I think we can.
Yeah, after playing one of the best teams in the country. And one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of people are, for as many people that are actively rooting for Deion Sanders for the first time in Colorado and paying attention to college football, I think there is a rumbling within the establishment and a lot of folks within sports media and things like that are actively rooting against Deion Sanders despite having no bias against Colorado or anything like that.
Right.
Why are folks in the sports and sports media establishment so upset at what Deion has been doing at Colorado?
Yeah, no, the dog whistles have come out.
Yes.
It started with Colorado State, where the coach was saying, like, my mother raised me better than to do a press conference with a hat and shades. I said, oh boy, already? This is just, what was that, week 3 already? We're here. Look at this. And then with the coach in Oregon, I remember watching that game, and obviously Oregon, they've had an impressive, very flashy program for quite some time. Not exactly the picture of humility in any by any stretch of imagination, but there was still a long sense of, like, I'm listening to the coach, I was like, man, this feels like, is he fighting Jack Johnson today? Like he sounds kind of a little close to that line, my man. But you saw it online, like a sense of, no way around it. Like, Oregon put a beating on Colorado last Saturday, but there was a strong sense of, I think there were some quotes online like, he did this for us, like they won for us, and I was like, who is us? So it's so interesting to me, the ways in which sports at its best brings folks from all over, regardless of your social location, together. Different races, different religions, different ways of life together. But at the same time, it can be a way in which the ugliest parts of our nature come full blossom. And it's just unfortunate that even with something like this, Deion's confidence rubs people the wrong way. He spoke
Absolutely.
about it very clearly in saying that, like, America still very much has a problem with the black man who lives in his full confidence, right? Like, there's something about, and I don't understand why this man who, has appeared in the World Series and Super Bowl, this man who, has been an all-pro, and won on the highest level and done so many, he's doing the side missions in life at this point. Like, why should he still be holding his hat in his hand? Like, I don't view it, as I said earlier, as arrogance if it's not just about him. Right, like he's alluded to the fact that he's talking in this way to take the pressure off of his kids, right? That it doesn't have to be about, the receiver who dropped the catch, or it doesn't have to be about the guy who missed the block, because he's taking all of the heat. And his press conference after the loss to Oregon was longer than the press conferences after the wins, right? Like, if you're truly an arrogant person, if you're truly a narcissist even, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time talking about how you failed, right? You're going to only want to be there for the highlights. But this man clearly is a person of substance who doesn't mind talking about the times where, it didn't work out the way he planned for it to work out. And he's not pushing the blame on anyone else. So I would love for the folks who just cannot stand Deion and his program and his success to really just interrogate themselves and think, why, right? Because we could just jump to, like, the obvious thing, which is racism, but also, we got to take the scenic route. I want you to really think about what it is that bothers you this much about him, right? Because there are other programs where bravado was there and it doesn't seem to rub you the wrong way. Why does it rub you the wrong way now? Just be honest with yourself. You don't have to be honest with me, right? I'll never meet you, but be honest with yourself.
The Oregon coach, I'll start there. I had no issues with that. I did think it was hilarious, a little ironic, of course, that the team with 50 different uniform combinations every year is and no national championships,
none.
Is talking about flash over substance, and that's not Hollywood. This is one here in the dirt. We're coming up from the dirt. Whatever he was saying.
Right.
I didn't have an issue with that because I think in any competitive environment, you're looking for an edge, and if you need to make up a narrative where you're the underdog somehow against, you're the 10th ranked team in the country, you're playing the 19th, you're like, we're the underdogs.
Right.
This team won, one game last year, but we're favored by 22 points or whatever it was.
Come on.
It's normal, right? Athletes always talk about having a chip on your shoulder and nobody believed in us and all that. So, maybe he did toe the line a little bit, but I personally didn't have an issue with it.
Get you.
The other stuff was very, very, very loud dog whistles. Oregon is taking a stand for us.
Right.
The very loud cheers, for the beatdown that Oregon put down. I mean, it's not, again, it's competitive.
Right.
You're not saying take it easy on Colorado, but I think a lot of people took extra pleasure in seeing them get beat down. Again, because this, loud, you can say arrogant, confident black man is quote unquote being put in his place.
Right.
And they make it bigger than sports. And I know that this,
absolutely,
this whole thing with Deion and all that, sure, it is bigger than sports in the sense that he's trying to break the glass ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to kick some doors down, but
Mm-hmm.
they make the results on the field about way more than sports. And I think
Yeah.
that's the issue there. And I think the other thing is, you talked about Deion and all he's accomplished, and I think it's not it's definitely not unique to Deion. I mean, are there other examples that you can think of? I'm sure we could be here all day talking about them, but of guys, especially young black athletes or older black athletes that have reached the top or reached the pinnacle and have been looked at as like, maybe you need to humble yourself for whatever reason.
Oh goodness, we could really just be here all day, right? But I think in terms of contemporary folks, I think about the treatment, jumping to the NBA, of
Mhm.
like Russell Westbrook, and even the ways in which like Draymond Green is viewed, right? Like Draymond Green, 4-time champion, there's no opinion Draymond's afraid of, right? Or afraid of sharing, but you can tell that people really are irked by his like outspokenness. And I think about Russell Westbrook's interaction, particularly with the home crowd for the Utah Jazz, and how like ugly it's been. I remember that was it last offseason where it looked like he was gonna get traded there. I was like, please don't send that man there. It just feels like he might retire immediately if he gets traded there. But just thinking about the ways in which these ugly parts of our history as Americans, they haven't died. Like they're very much still there. People often want to think about this as distant history, or maybe history that never really is, about this ways in which we build certain folks up, and the ways in which we sort of say like, oh, this person does it the right way, like, and just the ways in which we'll talk about athletes, particularly about black athletes, and the sort of attributes they have. What do we like about them? What are the things that we dislike about them? Like the reasons Allen Iverson was so castigated, and the ways in which, even though he's black, that someone like Steph Curry was uplifted, right? Like there's the ways in which we will sort of put folks into these particular boxes, and not allow people to have the free range of being a human being.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a conversation that we can have. It's probably a topic for another podcast, but just how certain athletes are viewed in certain ways, and there's so many layers to it. Maybe there's the colorism, the appearances, the maybe Steph Curry being, very loudly Christian versus Allen Iverson, who's associated with hip hop culture. And there's so many
Right.
examples, so many layers to it. And I think with Deion in particular, I think it's interesting because he is very, very upfront with his faith. He wears it literally on his chest.
Right.
Came out, with a big gold cross, and he's not shy about sharing it.
No.
I think that's another thing in America, which is interesting, is there's a lot of guys and a lot of athletes, both black or white, who are allowed to profess their faith. But I think once it gets to a point where it's quote unquote too much,
Yeah.
people seem to turn on it. When it becomes, you're proselytizing,
Yeah.
just to use that word, there's like almost a negative reaction to it. And I think in the case of Deion, I mean, like I said, he's very upfront with it. It leads his conversations. It leads his life. I mean, what is it about him and his faith that you would think most of Christian America would be behind this guy?
Right.
But, and again, the simple explanation is racism. But is there a more complex answer to that? Is there a more complex explanation for why that is?
Well, it made me think about the ways in which, even though he was beloved, I think it made me think about Tim Tebow and the ways in which the audience kind of turned on him a bit too, especially once he got to the league and wasn't playing that great. I remember he had like one great play for the Broncos. That might have been it. But yeah, it just feels with Deion, I don't think it's hitting people's ears or their eyes in the same way, right? Like I listen to him and I see someone who's living out his faith, not in the sense of like we're gonna win and we're gonna be great, but just in the ways in which he's talking about the kids on his team as if they are his children, right? Like, and it doesn't seem insincere. Once again, I have to use seem because I'm not there on a day-to-day basis to see the details, but it just seems as if this person who's very much like he's checking all the boxes that you would think the sort of like archetype of middle America would enjoy, right? Like he's has the chain on, talks about Jesus consistently, talks about how his decisions are informed by his faith, talks about his very job as this sort of vocation of like assignment, it's like a mission from God that he's on to coach and mentor young men into what he describes as being better fathers and better husbands and so on and so forth. It just feels as if the delivery of it, because he's not living into sort of like the piety that American evangelicalism sort seems to enjoy, like the almost like the all shucks of it all. Like, I don't know how I'm so great by the grace of God. Like, he's not living into any of that. His almost has sort of like the streaks, and I don't use this as a derision by any means, but almost like the streaks of like a prosperity gospel, right? Like, sort of like if you have the image of,
I was really about to say that, yeah.
right? Like,
you read my mind.
100%. You can see that it's that kind of thing of like, he wasn't a preacher, but sort of the Ric Flair, my shoes cost more than your house. It's what he's hitting people with.
I think in general, one thing that a lot of people are upset about is the flash and the hype that come with Deion. And you talk about their last game against Colorado State at home. You had The Rock on the sideline. You had Lil Wayne taking the team out.
Right.
You had, I don't think we've seen anything like this since maybe USC in the early 2000s.
Come on, right.
Or the U back in the 80s.
That's
where, celebrities are coming out and rappers and all this stuff are making it known that, like, yeah, we're down with Colorado. We're down with Coach Deion. Why does he have so much pull? What is the cultural significance of Deion Sanders? I mean, in America, and I guess, more so in Black America, that gives him this kind of pull and like cultural cachet that allows him to attract this much attention and these kind of celebrities to his games.
Yeah, I mean, you can find a plethora of articles that are sort of likening what's happening in Colorado to Georgetown and UNLV. Where if you were a Black kid growing up in the 80s and early 90s, you very much thought Georgetown was a HBCU. Like, it did not feel like, I was like, wait, it's not. Like, I remember being kind of surprised myself, and so
that's about as private as it gets.
Exactly. But it's just something about Deion's charisma, and I just think he lives his life so freely and unapologetically himself. There's so much about the Black experience. It's funny. I was just saying this in my family. As a quick story, my oldest son plays the trumpet. And so I always listen to jazz in the evening. So he took out his trumpet and started playing along. And I was like, man, you're getting better. Like, this is really good. And, my wife was like, oh, maybe we shouldn't play it so loud. Like, it was like 6:40 or in the evening or so. And I said, we can't live our lives afraid of like the hypothetical person who's going to complain about us. Right. And I think a lot of Black folks live their lives in this sort of like bubble waiting for the hypothetical, like, angry phone call or the angry knock or the angry turn that down or stop being your full self. And to see someone like Deion living his life, not in a caricature, not as if he's trying to pretend to be someone or putting on this mask and being someone, but living like himself and just saying like, oh no, I am great. And then going out there and proving greatness. There's something really refreshing and gives, Black people a sense of possibility in a marginalized society. I think that's something very refreshing and rewarding to witness. And probably the other side of the coin is why it irks folks who would rather see Black folks just more humble and silent.
I think, there's definitely a fear of respectability politics and letting them define their actions. And I think for a lot of course, Black head coaches or Black head coaches, I think there is that respectability politics where they feel like they do have to act a certain way because, if I don't perform a certain way, if I don't act a certain way, if I don't carry myself a certain way, I may not get another job. Right, I may go back to, grinding in the fill room or being a position coach or whatever. And I think what's unique to Deion is that he is so successful outside of Colorado and coaching that he doesn't have that pressure because he can do whatever he wants. And, if he doesn't want to coach anymore or if Colorado goes 0-12 or whatever, he can just go to the booth. Yeah. He can get, multi-million-dollar contract to do that, or he can, whatever it is. We see him in all kinds of commercials. He's in Aflac and Subway and whatever else. So he's not worried. And he's like, I can be myself. I could be my whole authentic self. So I think that's the question that comes up with a lot of people is what he's doing repeatable? Is it possible, NIL and transfer portal and all that aside, is the personality, the cult of Deion and what he's doing to this program, can anybody else do this at any other program in the country?
The answer is yes and no, right? So No, in the sense of you cannot fake the funk, right? So if you're
Hmm.
not really about that life, you can't all of a sudden start trying to like act like Dion and have like the great shades on and the giant cross. Like that's not, if that's not your energy, everyone's gonna see through it. But at the same time, I really believe he's living out a blueprint that is very much repeatable, right? So you think about any let's pick any great player the past 20 25 years, right? Like, so I'm gonna stick with the
Like
Cowboys
Tom
still.
Brady.
Like Tom Brady was top of mind, right? So Tom Brady, it's not going to look exactly the same way, right? And we see Tom Brady already mentoring Shedeur Sanders, which, as someone who grew up rooting against the Patriots have been good since I was in ninth grade, right? And just like wouldn't go away for most of my teenage life. I feel like someone like Tom Brady could go to a program that isn't that respectable, right? Like, throw a dart at the map and pick a school, and by virtue of it being, I don't know, the greatest quarterback ever, it's going to turn things around in a way that if he truly believes in those kids, it's going to be transformative not only for those kids, his situation, but also for that institution, and it can help build a culture. I think, and this I say this firmly believing that far more retired athletes should really consider education. Like a lot of retired athletes should consider more than just going into the pros. Because I like the fact that Deion said he wouldn't want to coach in the NFL because if someone has all that money and not going to try, he'd just be too frustrated. But I think that retired athletes particularly have a responsibility, I'll go that far, to go into education and transform lives. Like I've seen the ways in which young kids particularly respond to like positive male reinforcement in the classroom. I was a former classroom teacher for 11 years. I've seen it. But to add the extra layer of if I were a pro athlete, the way that it would go, like I tell you this quick story of my first teaching job. I had just gone to the NBA draft in 2009, and I was able to get a picture holding a Knicks jersey, and I framed it. It looks like I got drafted by the Knicks, and the ways in which my students were so excited when they thought that their 6'3" teacher was a former professional athlete. Right, I told them the truth because I mean a lie can only live so long, right? But it was something beautiful to see the ways in which they were just like, oh man, this is awesome. And I think about what it would look like if across the pros you had folks who said, you know what, I'm not only gonna get my bachelor's, but I'm gonna get my master's and learn how to teach. Or I'm gonna go ahead and do what I need to do so I can become a full-time coach in whatever sport it is. The transformative aspect, not about just getting folks NIL deals and getting them into the pros, but for the whole life mentorship thing, I think could be really amazing. So I hope more athletes take this Deion route. I hope that we have a blueprint and not
Yeah.
just a phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and we interviewed former NBA player Tark Abdul-Wahad
Yeah,
recently,
yeah.
and he talked about his post-retirement experience and coaching girls basketball. He was coaching boys basketball at a local high school in the Bay Area, and he had moms and parents reaching out to him and asking him to start like an AAU program for their girls, and being and he was able to be a transformative figure in their lives and helping these girls go from amateur basketball players to playing high school at a high level, or college at a high level. And there's a certain like credibility that comes with having that resume, whether you're a 10-time All-Star, All-Pro, Hall of Famer, the GOAT, whatever, or if you just happen to play in the NBA for a few years, you have that credibility, that instant cachet that comes with that. And kids will perk up, kids will listen to you a little more than the average Joe that's off the street. So I definitely think that's something that I think Deion is maybe making more accessible or more
Yeah.
realistic for folks. I don't know if Tom Brady's the one that's going to be doing it, but
Right.
I can't see a lot of other high level former athletes going that route and seeking to transform the lives of young people at both the college and high school levels. So you mentioned NIL deals, and I think we'd be remiss to ignore that detail in that particular part of the story, and
Right.
of how Deion has been able to succeed both at Jackson State and at Colorado so far, as this perfect storm of the era of college football that we're in, with the NIL, which is allowing these kids to make money off their name, image, and likeness, and of course the transfer portal, which has allowed them to treat college sports a little more like pro and professional free agency.
Yeah.
So, what is it about Deion, and how has he leveraged both of these tools to be able to rebuild this Colorado program? And I mean, we'll build up the Jackson State program as well.
Yeah, I mean, clearly a marketing genius, right? He's brought in his son Deion Sanders Jr. to document every single moment, right? They had the Coach Prime documentary. Their social media presence is very, very strong. And just thinking about all those eyes and impressions, that raises a player's valuation, right? Like if it's one thing, if this is a place where that marketing isn't happening, you can only demand so much. But if you're able to take that data and say, look at all these impressions I have, look at all the likes that we've gathered, look at people want to hear me on this podcast or see me on this TikTok, it starts to add up heavily. So I think just really having that sense of how to promote yourself effectively, this is the perfect time for him. I think 30 years ago it would have been very difficult, right? Where people were still getting paid, but it wasn't above the table. And I think now being able to show folks like you can live a full life, a wealthy life at this point. I'm seeing that clip where Shedeur Sanders is on the phone with Deion and with Tom Brady, and he's talking about driving his Rolls Royce, right? And just thinking about, I was like, man, what's this guy going to get once he turns an NFL player? Is he going to buy a spaceship? Like, what's going to happen? Right, so it's the perfect time. It's the perfect time to be able to show folks, they were always professionals, right? So being able to show them the ways in which they can capitalize it, because the reality is not everyone's going to go pro. So some of these folks, they don't just need to be the nostalgic, oh man, we had such a great time back in 2023. They need to be able to take care of their families, regardless if they're, going into professional sports or not.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely the perfect guy, this marketing genius, this relentless self-promoter, who is able to raise the profile of these kids, this program. And I think NIL has revolutionized college sports, and he's just been in the right place, the right time. And of course, the transfer portal, we can't ignore that, has allowed him to, attract this top tier talent. And I think he's going to continue to do so as he builds up this program. And it's just, it's remarkable to see how well he's taken advantage of these tools at his disposal. And maybe, like you said, if this was 30 years ago, maybe this turnaround is not so sudden. Maybe he's having to, recruit these guys the old-fashioned way, or have them transfer and sit out a season. And just there's so many roadblocks to the success, or the instant success that they're experiencing here. And obviously, we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. That we're only 3-4 weeks into the season,
right?
But ultimately, what is success for this program? We'll say, this year, the next 2-3 years, 5 years. What does success look like for Colorado, and what does success look like for Deion?
I think for Colorado is consistency, right? Something that I think they have to really guard against is not having the equivalent of like Fernando Mania or Linsanity, right? Like we can be really excited, the jerseys can be sold out, and then, let's say they lose at USC and they lose like 5 games straight. It can just get very quiet. And then if next season they're not able to sort of come out and really show them, right? Because the next season, 3 wins is not going to be impressive, right? This season, it's like, yeah, you're good now. Like you've already improved. You can just kind of like coast, but you have to continue to build and consistently improve. And I think that's what success is going to look like. I don't think it's championship or bust. I don't think they have to win the whole thing in order to say this is successful, because I don't think that's a necessarily fair metric, especially given that he went to Colorado. Like let's be honest. But I do think that they have to consistently improve, and it has to be something where the program has a transformed culture, right? It can't just be, once he steps away from it, because he's going to step away at some point. I don't think he's signing up to be their coach for the next 20 years. I don't think that's true. I could be wrong, but I don't think that's true. And I think it has to be something where it's really transformative. And for Deion, I think success looks like proving that he can coach on this level, so that when Florida State is open, or when Nick Saban retires, because I really think those are the 2 programs that are on his list. I think it's either Nick Saban's retirement or when Florida State has a vacancy. I think those are the places he wants to go. And so when either of those things happen, he's able to show, look, I took Colorado to fill in the blank. Like whatever that fill in the blank is has to be something that allows him to make that next step.
Yeah, I think we can say, I mean, this season is already a success at some level.
Yeah.
Obviously, you would hope that they finish somewhere around 500, maybe win 8 games. Some of the college experts have pegged them around 7, 8 wins, which would
Yeah,
be
that's
a massive leap.
yeah.
And I think, he definitely isn't going to be there for 20 years. I think my hope is that he stays there for, 3 to 5 years,
Yeah,
maybe 3 years,
Yeah,
just
three.
so we are able to see the full extent of his recruiting capabilities, of the talent that he's going to transfer, because it's hard to build up a college football program even with NIL and transfer portals and all that stuff. You can't build it overnight, and I think for success for him would be, I think they're moving to the Big 12 next year, so it would be competing for at least the share of the Big 12 title, being I think finishing this season ranked would be a massive success. And if they're able to finish, somewhere in the top 15, top 10 next year, or within the next 2-3 years, I think that'd be a massive success. And obviously Deion is a very ambitious person. I do see him moving on to another job. And like you said, if he is able to take Colorado back to prominence, back to, top 15, top 10 in the nation, one can only wonder what he would be able to achieve at a Florida State or Alabama or Texas A&M or one of these, big time schools down in the South that have this fertile recruiting ground and all that. Because I'm sure it's hard to get kids out to Colorado.
Yeah,
it's not exactly a football hotbed. So
right.
But I think he's already exceeded expectations so far, and we'll have to see. We'll have to revisit this. Maybe we can have another conversation at the end of the season and do kind of a year in review for Colorado and see what's next. But any final thoughts on Deion Sanders and this whole thing? I know we've covered a lot, but anything that you want to share about, maybe your feelings on Deion and how this has been such a significant moment for you as well?
Oh yeah, this has made me pay so much attention to college football. Like I'll confess, I grew up in New York. We weren't watching college football like that on Saturdays, right?
Yeah,
like,
they don't care about that.
Did not care about it at all. And I have found myself every Saturday in this season, who has a birthday party? Nah, they need to move that birthday party because Colorado's playing at noon. Like, just really like being excited. Like, my kid's soccer game got rained out. Like, oh yeah, we could go watch Colorado. Like just really thinking about the ways it's really felt like not just this isolated, like, oh, I'm into this game, but it's become a real cultural moment. Like you talked about prominence, because relevance is already there. Like they have relevance. So I think his presence in Colorado is big business, right? And just thinking about what it means for the town of Boulder is not a big place at all, right? So like to have that many folks there, to have sold out games, to have sold out merchandise, to have Colorado, if you're watching, major sports networks like ESPN, you're just inundated with wall-to-wall coverage. It's transformed the expectations there, and I think it will be great to see it sustained over the next. I'm right there with you. I think he's there 3 years minimum, but I can't see it past 5. And I think that him being able to sustain this fever pitch over the next 3 to 5 years is really going to have long-lasting effects on the Colorado program. We haven't seen, even though the national attention isn't there, but Jackson State hasn't gone into the dumps. It's doing well within the confines of FCS. So I think in that same vein, Colorado getting to be like nationally ranked throughout his tenure would be something very significant. They fell in the rankings, unfortunately, after Oregon, but I do think they'll get back in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm right there with you. I am a college football fan. I do love the sport of football, but I don't necessarily have a favorite team. I kind of generally root for the Pac-12, being a California guy. But
no doubt,
leading up to the season, I put Colorado at the top of my Yahoo sports app. This is my favorite team.
Right.
I would make sure to watch every single game. Same thing. It's become appointment viewing. And if you would have told me, told anybody last year, hey, Colorado State is going to finish at 1-2 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast, and it's going to be the biggest game of the weekend, people would look at you like you're crazy. Like, what? Nobody cares about that.
No.
So it definitely it's become a cultural moment. Like you said, relevance is already there, and hopefully prominence is next for this program. And I think we're both rooting for Deion, and unfortunately, folks have made it bigger than football in a
Right.
negative way. I think we're rooting for it to be bigger than football in a positive way, to
No
open
doubt.
up new opportunities for guys like Deion, for former athletes, for black head coaches and all that. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Where can we find your work? Where can we find your podcast? And where can we find you on social media?
Absolutely. So at Baddest Chaplain on Facebook, Instagram, on Spill, Substack, baddestchaplain.substack.com. But you can listen to Baddest Chaplain on Spotify, Apple, and Substack, and also on YouTube. So thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
Likewise.